Good evening, everybody. This is the December 20th, 2022 Town of Monroe Planning Board regular meeting. Noreen, would you please do the roll call?
Bonnie Franson.
Here.
Jeff Manson.
Here.
Pat Shea.
Here.
Nick Napoli.
And with that, oops, sorry.
You're good.
With that, I will point out the fire exits. There are two in front of me and behind the audience. There's an exit this way, which was the main entrance into the building, and then there's another one out at that end. With that, let's please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag. First item on the agenda is, let's do the approval of the meeting scheduled to the end.
I just needed to make sure I put it on.
Okay, so we'll do first project, which is Homeland Towers and Verizon Wireless, 2426 Strauss Lane, Monroe, New York. Good evening.
Again, for the record, my name is David Kenny. I'm an attorney with Snyder & Snyder. With me to my right is Vincent Xavier, Regional Manager of Homeland Towers. The application, as you know, is for a wireless telecommunications facility at 2426 Strauss Lane. We were last before the Planning Board, and there was a couple of questions regarding the need for the facility. Particularly, there's a new site that's just been approved in the town of Chester. You also had some questions regarding our rate analysis. Coverage maps provide an updated supplemental radio frequency justification report. That should be the one that's called Mary Crest RF zoning there. There you go. So, supplemental, if you could go to the next slide. Or, sorry, the next slide after the introduction RF justification. There you go. So, paid per slide. Yeah. So this is the existing 700 megahertz coverage. The 700 megahertz is known as the low band. We were talking a little bit last meeting that there's different frequencies that are used with the wireless facility. The 700 megahertz is the lowest frequency, so it propagates the furthest distance. So this would show the most existing coverage. This also shows predicted coverage from the Walton Park site. That's in the bottom left, if you could see that. It's basically the Walton Park site. That's that town of Chester site that was just recently approved. So essentially, even with that Walton Park site going on air, there's still a gap in coverage in the area surrounding the Mary Crest or the proposed site at 2426 Strauss Lane. If you go to the next slide, this shows again the 700 megahertz would be covered from the Mary Crest site. This fills in the gap in coverage, which is separate from the gap in coverage that the Walton Park site is addressing. If you go to the next slide, this is what is known as a best server coverage map. So this helps you understand the capacity and how a site is going to be able to offload capacity from existing sites. As we noted, this site has a dual function. It's not only to fill the gap in coverage in the area surrounding, but there's also two sites known as the Monroe Beta, which is the beta sector at the Monroe Tower, that's to the right, and there's also the Neptune Tower to the very south of the town. That alpha sector is shown in yellow coverage, and the Monroe Beta is shown in the red coverage. The Walton Park site has this light blue coverage to show where it's going to be offloading capacity. So as you can see from the next slide,
this is actually, if I could just chime in real quick, it's actually a good slide to show that part of the reason we are where we are is that the town does have overlay districts or utility tower zones. Those are shown with blue circles on this map, and this map is good to show that within the closest blue circles, Verizon already has facilities. And there are no utility zones in the area that would cover the area of need. So I just wanted to chime in just because this is a good map to show the locations of those utility overlay zones in blue circles, and that there's nothing in the area, and that we're already at the existing ones.
When you say the circles, those are the cell tower overlay zones, correct? Yeah, not, because there are utilities in the area, overhead lines, you're just referring to the, for the cell towers.
Correct. As part of our application, we're before the Zoning Board of Appeals for a use variance, because the town only allows as of right within those selected districts. I think what Vincent is just pointing out, there's none of those districts within this area that we're searching for this particular facility. If you can go to the next slide, this green is now what the Marycrest coverage is going to be dominant in. So as you can see, it's overlapping with the red and the yellow in areas that the blue is not covering. What this is really showing is that this is going to be able to offload capacity for that Monroe Beta site and that Neptune Alpha site, because that overlapping coverage will provide the capacity relief. Now, this isn't where the only coverage from the site will go. This is what we're showing as where it will be dominant. So the idea being, if you're in that green shaded area, your phone will be connecting to the Marycrest site. If you're in that red shaded area, your phone will still be connecting to the Monroe Beta, and if you're in yellow, you'll be connecting to the Neptune Alpha. The idea of having this overlapping coverage is, we showed in the previous reports, these sites, the Monroe Beta and Neptune Alpha, are at or exceeding capacity in the area. So you need a new dominant server to provide another way to provide coverage in the area and offload the capacity or the traffic from these two existing sites. If you can go to the next slide. This is the existing coverage at the 21 megahertz. As we said before, we showed the 700, which propagates further. As you can see, the gap is much larger on the 2100 megahertz. If you go to the next slide, this is the 21 megahertz filled in. If you go to the next slide, this is again best server at the 21 megahertz. This is essentially the same as we showed for 700, but at a different signal strength level.
Frequency.
Well, frequency, which propagates a little shorter distance. If you go to the next. So then what we showed is also why we chose this 96-foot rad center. If you can go to the next slide. We have some narrative language in here. Essentially what we're saying is that we have the surrounding trees and the need for the capacity relief. We need to make sure that we clear all the treetops to provide the extent of that coverage as we were showing for the best servers. If you can go to the next slide, we have some kind of visual representations. So these areas that are circled, these are areas that we know would be covered even better at a 106. So if we went 10 feet and higher, this is the coverage that we would be getting for the 21 megahertz. Now, if we go down to the next slide, this is what we're currently providing. As you notice in those areas where they're circled, the coverage has shrunk a little bit. So this is what we're proposing now. If we went 10 feet higher, we'd actually have a little bit better coverage in the area. So there's already been some concession in coverage to try to make sure that we have the minimum height necessary. And if you go to the next one at 86, it should be down. Sure. And that's where you see it's even more. It's much more significant than the 106 to 96 from the 96 to the 86. And so this slide kind of gives the reasoning for this, which is what we did was a line of sight map. Basically, the radio frequency doesn't exactly travel in a direct line. But the way we know it is that with these treetops being so close and then the elevation where we have to get down to, it's likely that for some of the frequencies, they may be blocked at an 86-foot rad center at the top of the trees. The treetops, the foliage, it attenuates the service and it blocks the coverage, meaning it doesn't propagate as far or as well. So this is basically what we showed at the 106. If you go down to the next one, so the 96, you're losing it even more and more is hitting the treetops, and then at 86, again, more and more is hitting the tops of the trees. So essentially, this is just for Verizon's coverage. This is just Verizon needs this 96 rad center for it to be able to propagate the service to what we need for our coverage objectives. But it's also kind of showing that if this is the minimum height for Verizon, the shorter you're going is probably going to impact the ability for this site to provide co-location. It's all speculative because we don't know what T-Mobile or AT&T's needs are in this area, so they may not have the same capacity need as Verizon. But at the same idea, the higher the tower, the more rad centers you have above the tree line, the more likelihood we have for co-location ability. But what we've shown here is that regardless of that additional benefit of having co-location, this is the height that Verizon has said that it needs for its facility. And this is just a close-up comparison of some of the areas where the coverage is lost once you go down in height. Questions regarding?
I just have one question. So you're Verizon, right?
Correct.
And you own a certain part of the spectrum.
Correct.
And what is that, 23 megahertz to what?
So they have a bunch of different licenses from the FCC. So you have licenses in different frequencies. So we have, I believe, 2100 megahertz, 700 megahertz, and I believe there's a 1900 megahertz in there. There's other frequencies they have as well. What we do with that is basically that's the low, mid, and high band. And so what we're really showing with that is the low band is best for these kind of coverage analysis because it propagates the further. So if you show a gap of coverage at the low band, you'll have a gap of coverage at the high band or the mid band. And then
So your competitors like AT&T, and they own other parts of the spectrum, and that overlaps this as well, I'm sure, right?
correct. They also have low band, mid band, high band. I represent T-Mobile as well on other sites. They also have low band, mid band, high band. They have specifically different frequencies so that they're not on the same channel, so to speak, but they're essentially within similar bandwidths, I'll say.
So their towers are where in relation to yours? I mean, do they overlap?
So their towers, I don't have all of their site information.
Yeah.
So I would have to get that information from T-Mobile or AT&T, but it's not really relative to Verizon's network. So the FCC has stated that even if T-Mobile had service in this area, Verizon still has a right to provide its services in the area. Now, where the overlap comes would be how is T-Mobile, if they're providing service to the area, how are they doing that? Now, if there was a tall tower, like 2 feet away from us, and T-Mobile was beyond there, that would be something that we would have to review for a co-location potential based on your local code criteria. That's not really the scenario now because we've also done an alternatives analysis. We didn't find any existing tall structures. That's actually Vincent's first job, makes it a lot easier on Verizon if they can just co-locate somewhere where they're existing. So we did submit an alternatives analysis with our application, which certified that couldn't find any of these tall structures. We also reviewed other properties in the area. They were either not viable they wouldn't provide the coverage that was necessary, too low in elevation, too far away from the gap, or the property owners just weren't interested, didn't want us to lease land.
Well, like, you have T-Mobile, I understand, they share, do they share your spectrum?
No, so we each have different licenses. There's
Yeah.
4 main FCC licensed carriers, and T-Mobile is coming out as the 4th. They all have different frequencies and different spectrum. The idea being if we were both on the same spectrum, it would be overlap of communication.
So, and then just explain wideband and where that is here in Monroe. Wideband, 5G?
Okay, so yeah, the part of this tower, I think, may have 5G services. It's essentially another technology that goes with this. So we're still, most of your phone calls are still operating in this area, probably 4G LTE network. 5G is rolling out. What that does is it increases capacity, increases data. So for certain types of high data communication, video calls, doing some sort of Zoom communication, it may go on that bandwidth. It just increases capacity for the site. It's another technology that's working with other technologies in creation for Verizon's network.
But it doesn't have the distance.
Correct. That's just a nature of when you get to the higher frequencies and the higher bandwidth, they just don't propagate as far.
That was my recollection when we started the whole discussion about the application last time, that these are going to be 5G,
Correct.
and hence why the coverage area is much smaller.
No. So it's 5G will be part of the technologies as part of this tower.
Okay.
But it's not the only technology as part of the tower. So 5G is basically a term that's used for this high data capacity services. That'll be included with the bundle of services that come from this tower, because that's included with the bundle of services that are on Verizon's network. But you still have 700 megahertz, which isn't really a 5G technology or 4G technology. It's just a lower frequency band. When you're talking about 5G, it's a technology, not a frequency. So it's really not an apples to apples comparison. 5G is one of the technologies that'll be used as part of several technologies for this facility that's used for Verizon's network. So 5G will be on here. That would be more of the high band coverage that we're showing, but you still have 700 megahertz, which is the low band technology, which has been around before 5G and still handles a lot of phone call network.
Thank you.
It's confusing, and trust me.
Yeah, because
Just the
I definitely remember us talking about the fact that the area of coverage was decreasing, and I thought it was because of the newer technology.
So I think what we discussed last time is over time, the coverage areas for towers have shrunk. There's two reasons. One is the technology, when you get up to the higher frequencies and the newer technologies, they do propagate less as far. It's also capacity usage. The more capacity you have in an area, like what we were showing for the best server maps, the more data that go on, the people that are closer to the tower, they get almost like first priority for that. So the further away you get from the tower, you may have capacity issues, and you're not the first in line to get the capacity relief to the tower. All of this is an attorney trying to explain this technology to you. So we're going to have our RF engineer come to the public hearing, probably do a much better job than I've tried to do right now. Ultimately, what I'm trying to get forward is that 5G is part of the bundle of technologies this year, but the 700 megahertz is really the furthest kind of propagating service that's been around since before 5G, and that's what we're using to show the gap in coverage here.
Yeah, I would like to go back and look at the record because, again, I recall a discussion about we were getting more cell towers because I thought it had to do with either the technology or the frequency, and that the coverage area was tighter as a result. But I'll take a look at,
Sure.
at what we had previously.
And we'll bring our RF engineer to the public hearing to give a better explanation and answer any questions you may have.
Just one comment. On the cover of the engineering necessity case, it refers to the future O&R lake site, which the antennas are there. I'm assuming that they're in service. So it's probably not future anymore, and there may be other documentation where it's been referred to that way. So again, just for consistency's sake with the application, it probably makes sense to make a change there.
We'll clarify that. This also doesn't show the Walton Park site on the town of Chester. This was like our
Right.
cover sheet for this, but we'll make sure to update that as well. This was the same cover sheet that was used on the original RF report.
Who would be building the tower? What company?
Homeland Towers.
Homeland Towers? Okay.
Just to understand the relationship a little bit, like I'm the real estate developer. He is our attorney, is representing both us and Verizon as separate entities. My company actually builds and owns and manages and maintains the tower, and then we sublease to the carriers. So that's like one of your questions before. You were speaking about, Verizon's towers and if T-Mobile's there. The tower itself, some are owned by the carriers independently, but co-location is forced. The tower itself is just a structure upon which the carriers locate their antennas. So, the Neptune or the Monroe site, that's not just a Verizon site. Some of the rooftops may be only Verizon is there, but for Monroe and Neptune, there are other carriers there now as well. And my company would build and own it, and then we sublease to them all. And obviously, we want co-location, part in order to minimize proliferation, but obviously, just as a business model, we're going to design the tower to make sure that it's co-locatable by the other entities as well.
I was going to say, so was there anything else you wanted to show with regard to this particular?
Not with this one. I wanted to go to the visual analysis report, which we've discussed the need for this tower enough. I think now what it's going to look like, I think, is on everyone's mind. But just to touch back while we're switching this over, the town does have its own wireless consultant. Cityscape has been retained by the town and the ZBA to review the application, and we would just put forth that cityscape report did demonstrate or did document that the RF justification report was accurate. There is a gap in service, and there is a need for this facility in this area. So it's not only our putting forth this information, the town has retained its own independent wireless expert who's confirmed the information we've provided. But for the VRA, so, go ahead.
Hello? Okay. You might want to refer this updated analysis to your consultant because they did look at the original one, but I don't believe this question that came up as far as the height justification versus just justification in general had been addressed, so I'd suggest referring that over.
That's something that Sean's been normally forwarding, or are you Noreen? Okay.
I've been sending this stuff to the ZBA, so I just include.
Okay.
Welcome their input, but I do note that in their original report, we made a comment that it was at the minimum height necessary, and they confirmed that our height was probably reasonable in the minimum height necessary, but absolutely, we welcome their review, and if they have any further comments, we'll address those. So as part of the visual analysis, what we did, with the help of the town's input, we did what was known as a balloon test. We floated a balloon at the property at the proposed height of the tower, and we went around to several different vantage points, which we brought to this board to get your input on, to confirm which kind of viewpoints and photo locations should be used to document the visibility of the tower. We had our expert from Saratoga Associates drive the town and document through taking photos where the tower was visible and what the approximate visibility of the tower was. This was done, of course, by taking a photo of the balloon where it floated. There was some wind that day, so if the balloon was a little bit outside of where the top height, they were able to use LiDAR technology to put the photo simulations exactly where the tower would be. So what we did, this is the...
Additionally, prior to the balloon float during leaf-off conditions, I drove around from the same viewpoints that would have been taken during the balloon test and took photos from them during leaf-off, and this VRA combines both the leaf-off and leaf-on photos in order to show you potential aesthetic.
So yeah, this is the narrative report. In the narrative report, they did discuss what you're just going over now, some of the areas that were specific pursuant to the town code, what areas that were specifically reviewed, as far as if there was any identified aesthetic resources within the town. And so we made sure to try to incorporate those and whether or not there would be visibility of the tower from those locations. The narrative is really a detailed kind of breakdown of where we went through, but I think the photos, particularly the photos in Appendix C, the photo simulations, I think those will kind of be the better view to show the public and the board. But I do welcome and encourage the board to read the full narrative report. So the Appendix A, this was just the viewshed maps that we had already provided the board. We did both the bare earth and the land cover viewshed maps. These are the same maps that you saw before. There's nothing changed from what we previously provided.
And just to clarify on that, the bare earth analysis is if there was no trees, no buildings, no nothing. I guess.
And the land cover viewshed is the one you're showing right now. If you go to Appendix B, this is just the photo log. So these are all the photos we took. We tried to point out if we saw the balloon in the photos, where we saw the balloon. We tried to also document if it was likely that the balloon was not visible because it was blocked by a tree. We tried to comment if that was seasonably visible, meaning you could probably see it when the leaves came off the tree. Again, these are just we'll have a photo simulation of that. I think if you go to Appendix C, it's a little bit better. These are just all of the photos we took. So this is everything that was taken that day, but we chose some of the sites where we thought it was more prominent or in areas where maybe it was more important to see the visibility, and we gave you photo simulations of those areas. Most of these are the areas you're looking, like we have a photo simulation from that view, if you keep going.
And these are still on leaf.
Correct.
So to that point, I mean, right now it says balloon screened by foreground trees, but what happens in off-leaf will likely be visible.
Correct. So I think it's been, we'll take a look at that with the leaf off photos, but some of these, we tried to document if it would be just the leaves of the trees are blocking it, then we try to mark that as seasonally visible. If it's been completely blocked by the tree in the foreground, that's, even when the leaves are off the tree, more likely not visible. Here's the photo simulation. So,
It's leaf off now.
oh, these are leaf off, sorry. Appendix D is later.
Are there any from Route 17? Or 17M?
Photo, let's see. Photo 13 would probably be closest, but we have a few that are beyond 17. I believe this is 17. Can I approach?
But not at, where you're taking that particular photo, it's going to be in and among the trees. But there aren't any along 17 or 17M that, I'll have to take a look at the, I'll take a look at the
No,
view
there
shed.
is none in the area you were speaking of. I do remember driving that myself, and I couldn't see the balloon from there. The highway itself is tucked right next to the trees on the south and west side, so there was no visibility from there, and even the view shed maps didn't even foresee during any potential impact there, even during bare earth. So we didn't put viewpoints there. I did drive there anyway for what it's worth, and I didn't see the balloon. So no, there's no direct photos that were taken from that area.
Provided
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at that because I think it depends on, I'll just take a look at it.
If that is a concern, you want us to address it, I can have our staff use other means, even if it's a line of sight analysis showing that it's blocked, most likely just by terrain.
Also, outside of the
You just got to be on your mic, but he's asking you to.
Just to reiterate, it is physically far. It's outside of the 1 mile radius, but we can make sure if we do line of sight, just to give any kind of documentation of the visibility of it. Yeah, we have next is photo simulations in Appendix D. What we're doing is proposing, we are understanding of our location being on the Ridgeline Protection Overlay Zone, and Homeland Towers is proposing 2 alternative stealth designs for the tower. One being just painting the tower brown. We find that sometimes, especially with the leaf-off conditions, painting the facility brown helps blend it in with the trees that are surrounding it. But we are also proposing what is known as a monopine stealth design. So this is a stealth design that makes the facility resemble a tree. Having these large trees surrounding us does provide a unique opportunity to blend the monopine in with surrounding tall vegetation. If you go to Appendix D, we have, so here a couple of these show how far away they are. It's not very visible, but if we get to this one, we'll have a good one. This is just without the tower. The tower right there, this is the monopole. Now it's very faint. Yeah, sorry, right there. So again, this is just due to the sheer distance from where this photo is taken to where the tower is. This is the profile view of the tower. Now, one of the benefits of having this type of design versus what you'll see was the monopine design, it's actually hard to see because there's less mass in the air. So whenever you're trying to hide something, you're putting more stuff in the air to conceal it. So at some aspects, it's more visible. The trade-off, and this is for the board to decide, if it's preferable to be less visible of this tower, or even though it's more visible as a tree where it's more accustomed to being in this area.
I'd want to know how the mass of the tower was modeled. Is this actually reflecting the diameter of the pole accurately? That's just a general question. I don't know if it's included in the methodology.
It should be, because, so we use Saratoga Associates very often. They have full copies of the plans and the designs of the tower as part of making and preparing this visual analysis. So they have all of the information for the specs of the tower, so it should be accurate to the width of the tower. This is a photo simulation of the tower proposing, not just a standard tower. And so this is the monopine. As you can see, it's a little bit more visible, but visible as a tree. And from this vantage point, it's where the elevations are. From this vantage point, it's sticking up a little bit above the tree line. From several other vantage points, you'll actually see it's barely sticking above the tree line. It's really where your elevation is and where your vantage point is looking at it.
If anyone wants to raise a question or a comment, just go ahead as we go through.
So then we have this view as well. And this is in there. So that's the very top of it. As you can see, it doesn't come above the trees as much as from the other vantage point. It's really just your viewpoint through the trees. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that little bit top of the treetop right there. And that really blends in with the other trees. You'd be hard to tell that that's a wireless facility from this vantage point.
I'm wondering because you basically, how big is the Marymount site? The entire site in terms of acreage?
Property,
Yes.
several acres.
Sorry, 40 acres?
Property.
I'm wondering to what extent, if you were to shift it farther to the west, how it would reduce the visibility, the apparent visibility of the tree from Round Lake.
So
If we can go back to that. Basically, west here would. What do you think?
I'm wondering if it's right farther or in a direction, because I'm not entirely sure that this is due west, but in general, in a direction that might push that a little farther back. Obviously, then it may have effects on other locations, but I don't know how much play there is in the site. I'm just curious.
If you bring up the zoning.
Art, did you give those tonight?
So obviously, it was designed with the intention to meet setbacks. You know, there is some play. I would argue that moving it would not have a large impact to the view from here because you're on the same plane as far as ground elevation. But there is 156 feet technically in the direction you're referring to.
also, so included with the flash drive, there's an alternatives analysis that was provided with the planning board's application. This should be the one above right there. Yeah, 629. So Vincent did a review of alternative properties before this location was selected, but there was also a review of other locations on this particular property. If you go further down, most of this beginning is alternative properties right here. So there was other locations reviewed on the property, this B-C site before the A was chosen, and these were rejected because of the lower elevation. It wouldn't meet the coverage requirements. So what we were showing before is like the minimum height necessary. Essentially, that's also because of where we are on the elevation above sea level. So by having a lower elevation or going elsewhere on the property, it would necessitate a taller tower to almost achieve the same line of sight that we have today. We can have the RF engineer kind of explore more of that, and we can also discuss internally if there's maybe a slight shift that can be done, if anything, to improve visibility. But I don't think there's going to be a drastic shift in location because one of the reasons why we are where we are is we need that elevation. We need to be able to see over this ridge line and the treetops that surround.
Clarify, C, alternate location that was looked at on this property, B is actually,
So the changes that you evaluated for the analysis of alternative heights were at 10-foot increments, correct? So again, I think it may be subtle, but if there's a subtle shift of the location and then 5 feet instead of 10 feet, do you maintain your coverage and yet reduce that apparent height potentially of the tower enough so that, let's say the faux pine tree is used, or the evergreen, maybe it looks more like a bump, and maybe even if it's 2/3 the size, I think it would start to fit a little bit more. So it's really, to me, kind of the fine tuning. Is there the potential to get this down just a little bit more through a combination of potentially height and potentially a shift a bit, again, so that you retain most of your coverage, but because that seems to be the obvious location where it's particularly visible from the images that we've seen.
Absolutely, we can absolutely explore that and look into that. As Vincent was pointing out, we're a little bit handcuffed by the setbacks, trying to be respectful to those, but a slight tune or slight shift, we can absolutely explore that to see if there's anything we can do to better this facility.
And part of it's just simply the lot shape, because you're on a odd-shaped lot.
Correct. And we're trying to be in the area that's got the most vegetation. The elevation is also a key factor to why we're there. But it's kind of in an area that's furthest away from the nearest residences. So there's a lot of things that kind of made this an ideal location.
So I don't want to hit you guys with anything different, right? But I've been kind of waiting to see when I can bring this up. I'm kind of looking at this as like, playing devil's advocate a little bit here. And is there, with all the maps that you guys showed, is there any map that can be provided to show the electromagnetic radiation in the area from like your beta, alpha, all the sites around the area?
So they don't have that kind of map. So what we would have is, and we did provide it with our application, it's a radio frequency justification report. So that site in Monroe, they would have had to provide their own similar report. And in that report, they would have said, at certain feet, like 500, 600 feet from the facility, like emissions level drop to a certain level percentage. Essentially, the further away you get from these towers, the emission levels drop off drastically. So you probably wouldn't see for a map the size of like the town to see where the emissions are. You're more likely to see kind of a much shorter map that's probably just within like 100 feet of the site that shows you how far those emissions go out. And then you would have like a graph that would show you like over distance how they drop off and go down.
So to get that map, it wouldn't be possible? Or?
No, it's not a map of the town. So what we would have is we
All right.
have our frequency report, which has the graphs, and it's got, we call it a roof metric map. Basically what it shows is like certain area from the tower, and it shows in 3 different or 4 different colors, like blue being below 100%, yellow being 100 to 500%, and 500% or over. And it may show just blue and yellow being like 3 feet, like right in front of the tenants, you might hit 300% or something like that. And then the further you get away, it drops further and further down. So what you're asking for, a map of that scale and that size, we may not be able to provide.
How far do radiation waves go? How big do they get? I mean, there's a lot of towers in the area.
So wherever the signal coverage goes is where the radiation would go. But the idea is being correct. But the idea is like there is a threshold level for where it's becoming dangerous or too intense. And so what we've shown in our report is that there's no area for these tower sites that are exceeding that threshold level. So there's no area within from this tower that we're proposing that would exceed the threshold level. More likely you would see these on rooftop sites. There may be an area on a rooftop that exceeds the threshold level. As far as we have maps and kind of graphs for this individual site, I wouldn't be able to provide you an all-inclusive for the town of Monroe.
Well, no, just for like your towers, because I know you have the alpha and the beta, right? Those were yours, right?
No, well, they're the Verizons. We can ask them for their coverage reports, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm getting.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd say is if you look at the report, what I find more helpful than a map is an actual spreadsheet which shows the potential EMF levels for each carrier and then a cumulative total. And it shows over distances what those thresholds are. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but just historically speaking from all the sites I've done, if the federal government set a threshold, let's say 100, all of the towers I've seen at any distance, obviously the hypotenuse changes and that's the longer and further away it's going to be, fully loaded, generally they come in under 5% of that 100% maximum threshold. If you're talking about cumulative in the area, like these fluorescent lights and things let off EMF. Your refrigerator lets off. An anecdote I say is, as I understand it, a baby monitor. Everything has EMF. So,
Well, being online is a little nerve-wracking when you see these environmental impacts and the statements and all these different articles that pop up, you know?
No, it is, and I'm sure my attorney in a minute will talk to you about how the FCC preempts local jurisdictions.
FCC, right.
Yeah.
FCC is who? They're the
That's
ones
a
who set
federal-
that bar, right?
Correct.
On what's the threshold?
The Federal Communications Commission. So the FCC, basically, your national network is regulated from the federal government standpoint by the FCC. They determine, from television to your cell phones. So essentially what we have here is the radio frequency emissions levels. They have threshold levels. So the federal government stated that if anything's below this 100% threshold level, it's deemed safe. And what the federal government said is part of siting facilities, local governments are not able to make a determination based on RF health or RF emissions. Because as soon as it's shown that the site is compliant with the federal criteria, it's technically federally preempted. The goal of that is to have Monroe not have a different threshold level than the village of Monroe, or different threshold level than another community, and then the carriers have to, placate to all of these different. It's to have a standard, national standard. However, we don't like telling you guys this is not something you can't ask questions about and that it's a federally preempted topic, so we do put forth our FCC compliance report that shows that this facility, under the worst case scenarios, operating at the highest power and operating conditions that will likely never occur, it would still be compliant with those FCC's rules and regulations regarding radio frequency exposure. So we do put forth that tower will be compliant with those rules and regulations, and it's deemed safe from the FCC. As far as the surrounding existing sites, all of those applications would also be required to provide to this town a copy of that report. I'm sure as part of those applications that just recently went through the zoning board and the planning board, they provided that and they should be on record. So those documents were provided to the town. To have an all-inclusive one, it wouldn't be accurate because one, for that size, I couldn't make it accurate, and also for kind of opening the field to all sources of radio frequency emissions, it's also, we don't have all that information. So it wouldn't be accurate because I would know where Verizon's were, but I don't necessarily know in the town where AT&T's are, or T-Mobile's are, or where that guy who has the ham radio tower on his house is.
Or that kind of up. I was kind of hoping for that zoomed out look, scope of what the radiation emissions are in the area. I know by the feds, but just like to double check everything.
To Nick's point, did we get a map that showed all the potential locations that existing or proposed as far as all the other cell towers?
The coverage maps that we're showing you. When
That
we're
has,
showing you
those
the
are
existing,
all of them?
Well, those are all within the certain area.
Within the
Within
area
relativity
where
to
you're
us,
trying to.
yes. So
meet
that's what we were
coverage.
showing from the existing coverage. That's basically coverage from the existing towers that are online today. The one that's coming online that we know about is that Walton Park site that was just approved in Chester.
But these are all, not just Homeland or Verizon, those are all sites?
No, they're just Verizon sites
Okay.
for Verizon's network. That's what we have the information for.
So normally, in reviewing cell tower applications in other communities, we get sort of a cumulative where are all the structures and some indication that co-location isn't possible from other towers that may exist that aren't necessarily Homeland or Verizon.
Correct. So Vincent did, as part of his alternatives analysis, document that there aren't any in existence. So we aren't showing you any tall towers in the area because there aren't any that we're aware of.
We have a map or an exhibit of that was submitted
I'm not
early
sure
on?
how a map of no towers.
No, but for the record, even if it's just labeled, these are all the towers, et cetera, in the area. We have that as an exhibit?
Not specifically in that sense.
Or is it a narrative?
But in short, all of the towers that exist in the area, to my knowledge, Verizon is on. There is no tower that exists that Verizon's not on that we don't show on the documents. So what you have is a comprehensive analysis to the best of my ability of every tower in the area around the proposed site, because
These are-
Verizon's on them already.
So these are cell towers, though.
Yes. there's
So,
also
for instance,
rooftops
we have,
depicted on
we
that
have
as
the
well.
water tanks, we have, is this documenting every facility that exists in the area or to which you can co-locate?
So the Verizon maps document the Verizon facilities within the area. So they could be on towers, rooftops, water tanks. So that's what the RF justification report is showing, because that's how we're showing you the existing coverage. We're showing you where Verizon is today. As far as the existing tall towers or existing tall structures, what Vincent did is he reviewed the area to see if there would be any tall towers or structures within the area that Verizon could co-locate on. There weren't any that were found in that area. So we don't have a map to that, but we do have, if you show to the first, the RF justification report, we do have the search radius for this. And that search radius, because this is a capacity site and a coverage site, we have a really small area where we can locate this tower and still meet our coverage objectives. Yeah, the Mary Crest RF zoning. And they go to the first one. See that red circle around the red star? That's our search radius. So Verizon has dictated, based on its knowledge of the network, that a facility is needed within that area for us to be able to offload the capacity for the two existing sites and fill in the coverage objective. So Vincent is reviewed within that area and found no existing tall structures. So it's not that we've reviewed the entire town or entire area, but the entire search radius where we can locate a tower and still meet our radio frequency objectives, that is totally absent of any tall structures.
And just for the record, on page 4, I actually did search outside the search area as well, and I have a map on page 4 of my alternate site analysis.
That would be the 629.
The short answer to your question is no. I did not prepare a map that had every single structure in the area, like electrical power lines or anything like that. The short answer is no. This just shows specific properties that I and SiteAC agents investigated during the lead up to leasing of the proposed site.
If I understand what you're saying in relation to Bonnie's question is, if on the Mary Crest site there was a church with a tall steeple that would work for your purposes, you would just use that because it's way easier to attach to something that's already built than start from scratch. Essentially, is that?
From two standpoints. One is, I don't think we'd be able to get a use variance if you had a co-location opportunity and we had to build a new tower in the area. I think that would be difficult to get our local zoning approval. But also, as you indicated, there's a cost factor there too. Verizon would spend much less money if they could co-locate on an existing structure rather than taking part in the investment to building a new structure.
And I wouldn't be involved at all.
Well, I was just going to say
I wouldn't
that.
be here. But that's
That's
why
where I
it's
was
important,
going.
though, because the fact that I'm here means at some point I need to go to my powers that be and say that this is a project that's worth investing in because it is truly a site that doesn't have existing competition. If there was an existing tall site that could be co-located upon, I wouldn't be able to convince my company to spend the money to build it because you automatically have a competing
I
structure.
guess there wouldn't be value.
It wouldn't make sense, yeah.
So my other question, kind of inspired by what Nick said, is when you're doing your licensing with the FCC for this site, I mean, I understand the Telecommunications Act, we've done some previous applications, and where our ability to, kind of adjudicate that is. So when they're taking your application into consideration, although you're not providing us all of the existing other providers, they're aware of that. They've licensed each and every provider in every location. They know that not only is your facility within their threshold, but that it's not overloading the local threshold, so to speak. Do they look at that? Do they look at, these are all the sources of EMF in the area when they're looking at adding yours into the thing.
No.
And I mean, I think that sort of addresses Nick's
No,
concern.
they don't look at it at that level. Again, so the citing of this is for the town. The FCC doesn't really review a citing application in the way that you're thinking of it. There are some things like NEPA that gets reviewed from an environmental standpoint. The FCC more regulates the actual licenses, is I think what you're thinking of. The application is usually a bidding war for these different carriers to buy the spectrum so they can operate in there. What the FCC also does is they set that threshold level for what is deemed safe. So anytime the FCC, it's within their purview, they could inspect a site, they could do testing at a site, they could require that information on the site. But they would require information about that particular site, because it's whether or not that particular site is exceeding the threshold level. There is a requirement, and I think this is where maybe the question was going, is that if there is another source of emissions within 500 feet, that needs to be taken into account into the report. So that's why we're saying is the town-wide, when you get out to such a search radius, it becomes not accurate because you don't know what's in that area. But they have to know for a requirement, if there's any other sources of emissions within, I think it's 500 feet, that they'd have to take account those emissions as part of theirs. Also, what we do is because we believe it's a co-location site, and it's also what they do as part of just making sure that these are going to be within the target range. They do the worst case analysis. So they say if this site was operating at full capacity, full power, at the full operating power, that's basically the standards that they use to determine whether or not it would be compliant. In almost all scenarios, these are basically predictive modelings. The real world testing afterwards is almost like 100 times less. It's just what they do in these sites is they're trying to beef it up so that they know in that worst case scenario, we're still compliant. But in actual real world scenarios, it's probably even more compliant or even lower emission levels.
So I assume that also allows, since you're coming so well within the threshold with what you're proposing initially, that's what allows you to have the ability to seek out other people to co-locate on your facility and collect additional rents and income and that sort of thing.
That and structural capacity. I mean, what Vincent's talking about is basically most tower sites, again, the emissions, they dissipate over distance. So these towers being 96 feet in the air and physically far from the nearest user or nearest home, that distance, they're probably at the way, way low 1-2% by the time it gets that far out. Where these sites, where the FCC threshold level becomes more of an area for review is really on rooftop sites. So you have the antennas very close to the users, very close. You may have a lot of antennas on that rooftop. Rooftops also support sometimes radio communication devices that adds the emission levels. So that's in certain areas where you may say, this corner of this rooftop is actually above the threshold level. So we either need to power down the antennas or barricade off that area so no one can get into it. So that's really where it's more viewed. These types of tower sites, it's very rare that you're going to exceed the threshold levels unless you have a non-cellular technology on there like FM radio or something like that.
One of the things with regard to the visual that I also want to get a sense of is you're removing trees at the base. You're removing trees to be able to put the road in. And to what extent, therefore, is that simulation accounting for any tree removal that may occur? I don't know how much of the trees is in the foreground. Let's say on the round lake, I'll stick with the round lake image because that's the one that is the most visible after it's constructed. But if you are removing trees, I guess the question is to what extent in front of that tower are you removing trees so that, in fact, it may not be as screened as it would appear from that visualization? So that's just a general question.
First answer is we'll absolutely take a look into that. I believe we tried to, because these plans were as part of the Saratoga report. I think we'll ask them to double check to make sure it's not anything that's drastically changing the visibility of the tower. But again, we would point out that the vast majority of the trees that are coming down are related to the access drive that's being widened. So the location of the tower is actually put in a location that actually already had somewhat of a small clearing. So it would be less tree removal for the tower itself. The moving goalposts right now are how many trees do we have to remove because of this driveway? I believe my last comments to Sean were requesting a confirmation from Ben and him if the driveway that we've most recently proposed with the pull-offs, if that would be the one that would be deemed acceptable by the fire department. I've heard there's no further comments from the building inspector on this, but I haven't heard if this has been approved yet. So ultimately, it's a moving goalpost until we know how wide the driveway is, but we would say that most of the tree removal is not directly around the tower. It's further away from the tower where the driveway is.
Yeah, that's true. And as you can see in the narrative at the beginning of the Saratoga report, he does document the quantity of trees that are intended to be removed. And, as my vendor, it's his direction and it's his intention to show the simulations with that tree removal taken into account. But again, at the public hearing, we could have a representative from Saratoga who can speak more to that.
Else you want us to cover this evening? You had several of those attachments.
So, yeah, just, I guess, an initial comment is, or a question for the board is, we've proposed 2 alternative stealth designs. Is there any, I mean, you don't have to decide it now, but is there any particular interest in one over the other?
So the 2 being just coloration, and then the other
Correct.
is
Monopine
the
design.
monopine.
Either we can provide, the stealth tree design, or we can color it any color you want. We can do a brown color to try to make it blend in with the trees. We could do a lighter color, maybe like a light gray, bluish color, blend in with the sky. But those are the 2 real options, is painting the tower or coloring the tower, and also a stealth design like the monopine.
So just speaking for myself, I personally am still looking and vetting the visual analysis to make sure that it's actually accurately representing the tower from a massing and a scale perspective. Will it look that thin, like I said, earlier? So I'm not really prepared to make that determination. I think ultimately, it's really tough with the cell towers because it depends on what the backdrop is. And you're gonna, where you're gonna view it from. If the only location that it was visible from was Round Lake, then you could make an argument that leave it that skyish blue look because you're going to be up against, the sky. But if you're looking at it at a different angle where you have a backdrop of trees and woods, now suddenly it's going to look more visible because it is, a lighter color. I'm trying to remember, we reviewed one out in Shongam that got installed, and that was in a very scenic area. And they did a monopole where all the equipment was interior. So it didn't have any of the arms protruding off of it, but I can't remember if it was limited to maybe 2 carriers then. That's the limitation, but it really, really reduced visibility. Because up there, your backdrop is the Shonga Mountains, you have these, agricultural fields, you could see it for long distances. Plus, you could see it from the state park system up on the ridge, like Minnewaska, et cetera. But in terms of design, sometimes the simplest is better than making something, adding bulk to it by adding pines and et cetera. And I think that's why, from my perspective, some of this comes down to height and shifting. Because I think if that little bump was less pronounced, then maybe it would be okay. Having said that, I've driven around, I've actually seen trees that for whatever reason seem to stick up out of the canopy. So it's not that it isn't a natural condition, it's kind of odd, but it does happen. And there are other, and so I would only add the pine tree that you've selected is kind of that pine that looks like a hump. I think there are other styles or other types, I thought, of monopole design. There was one done up in Cold Spring that we took a look at, that we reviewed. No, I should say my company reviewed, but it was up in Cold Spring, New York, over in Putnam. And that, I want to say, the tree, the branching details, its design, I'm not sure that it was like this. It appeared to me, at least from the design, a little bit more natural.
Ultra one, do you mean the one that was,
The one that was by the cemetery?
yeah, that's actually my site. Actually, it's still in litigation. I haven't built it yet. I've been working on that for way too long. Yeah, basically the photo simulations from that. It was actually very similar to this type. You know, maybe the angle that you looked at it make it look different. When it comes to it, we do have some flexibility in adding to the taper. You can.
I think that's what it was. It was more like this than a bush, like this, like
I think what'll help is we can include in our next submission.
maybe some alternatives.
Or some real-world examples.
Yeah.
I think these are all
Yes.
the photo simulations from that distance.
Exactly.
I think when we show you the up-close real-world example, it looks much more like what you're thinking of.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great, because I think it's always useful. We've all driven around, we've seen some, and we've been like, oh gee, like, that's hiding anything, you know? But it's all where it is, and I think design is part of it, and then, but again, my board members can speak for themselves in terms of if they have any preferences at this point. But for me, I feel like I need a little bit more information and examples.
I mean, I'll also say I'm not quite settled on this issue, but having looked at the photos and the photo simulations, my gut instinct was that I thought the monopole idea was better, simply because of what you said, less mass. But seeing how it's going to be visible in the different places and that sort of thing, you know, I'm a little concerned about the view from Round Lake, because that's a significant recreation area in our town. But in looking at how it fits in with most of your view sheds, it sort of just sits a little bit above, and now you have something that looks much less artificial coming out from the top of the trees. So now I'm actually kind of leaning towards the monopine myself.
Again, we're not asking for a decision
No.
one way or the other tonight. It's just good to hear the feedback, so.
Yeah, just make it rainbow.
We can
I'm
paint
just
it the
kidding. I have
town
no-
colors, whatever you want.
I have no
That's okay, you
preference.
know,
If-
sometimes being totally different is
Yeah, I
is
let my
all
wife
right,
make all
too.
the color and shape
Yeah.
decisions, so that's up to these guys.
What's the high school team's colors? We'll go ahead and paint it.
There we go, yeah.
Understand you're working on a visible tower?
Ah, there you
It would make my job so much easier. You know, the goal
Is there a
obviously of the
cloaking device?
I have some Klingon thing, yeah.
Elon Musk hasn't invented it yet.
Yeah. You know, the goal of the monopine, obviously it's very subjective and it is based on location. You know, the goal is really, I think, in that sense, just to have it something that if you're just driving, you're not going to catch it out of the corner of your eye. But even the monopole does that, because whether it's painted or even if you just leave it galvanized, you know, over time it dulls and it doesn't reflect light so much. So, you know, it is a hard decision for you all to make.
Yeah.
But
That's-
we'll try to get you more information as you request.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think typically when we see the painting, we want a dull surface. We don't want shiny, bright, yeah. a
Try to
flat-
do the
flat
matte
paint.
finish
Yeah.
so that it won't be shiny.
I'm sure by now you have
Yeah.
sort of the protocol for the most part.
Yeah,
but-
and ultimately, that is the one kind of limitation, is you do have to see it in some way, because it's a line of sight technology.
Right.
So if you can't see it and it's blocked by the trees, you're likely not going to get the signal either.
Yeah. I'm going to, Pat, do you have any more comments? No? I'll turn it over to our consultants. Did Sean have comments, and Ashley?
We're not provided, but I can grab them.
Working now? Okay. So a lot of these comments that Sean had, you guys, the board already touched on. The biggest item was, I think, the driveway and the tree clearing associated with that, and how it, with that tree clearing in accordance with the town's tree preservation law. I think that's comment number 6.
We'll take a look at these comments and respond to them in the next submission rather than ad hoc right here, but I do note in our most recent drawings, we did have a tree preservation plan. We do note that Even though there's approximately 100 trees removed, there's still be well over 350 trees to remain on the property. So
Remind me, were we in Indiana bat or northern long-eared bat
I
habitat?
believe we are in Indiana bat
Okay.
territory. So we will have, the tree clearing restriction would obviously be, no tree clearing could be taking place between April 1st and November 30th, I believe.
But the trees,
November 1st.
review the type of tree that they are, whether they're exfoliating bark or what we're actually taking down?
I'm not sure I understand.
The reason.
What type of
she's
trees
asking
are
is 'cause
being
that's what
removed.
the bat uses.
That's
as
what the bat
yeah.
habitat. And
I'm not sure if they
tree
actually
roots.
identified it based on that. Generally, regardless of when we get the approval, we try just to maintain construction so that we are true to that restriction for the clearing window. If we ever do need to take action and take trees outside of that window, we would have to go through an entire analysis, a takings analysis, either. Sometimes they've had us go out there and like at night see if bats fly out of trees, or it would be a whole nother analysis done. For now, I would just say that it's our intention to stay true to that tree clearing restriction timeline.
Did we get anything back from DEC as far as comments? Any responses when we did lead agency? Did we even include them? I think we probably did.
Or we did, I could check on that. But just to comment on the tree preservation law, so that does require currently a one-to-one replacement of all the trees you're going to be removing. So I think that's what the comment Sean was referring to. So you're removing, I think, 135, but haven't proposed any mitigation, any replacement of that. So whether it's replacement on site, replacement off site, one-to-one basis, or some other basis with a payment of a fee. I know the town's considering amending the law. I don't think it's been adopted yet, so I'm not sure the status of that, whether it actually will be amended or not. But if you could take a look at its article. To go through there, there's other requirements too, as far as buffer zones and critical root areas that have to be protected, specifying how they're going to be protected. So I think just go through kind of those sections and make sure that you're showing everything, including the replacement trees.
We'll review on our next meeting.
Another comment Sean had is number 5 in regards to the fence around the pad site. So he was just looking for the board's consideration on the coloring of that.
From my perspective, I always like black vinyl. That's usually the most or the least visible. So unless anybody wants rainbow or another color, stealth.
Eiffel Tower.
Black will probably be.
We're here, we'll be willing to do whatever the board prefers, obviously. Really, in order to see, you'd have to be on. I thought I was. Usually I
Goes
talk too
on and
loud. My
off.
wife yells at me all the time, and now I'm not doing well.
Goes on and off all the time.
Yeah. We'd be willing to do whatever type of fence the board saw fit.
I think the remainder of the comments were on.
So we will respond formally to the tree, but our intention would be to obviously comply with the law, whether you wanted a one-for-one on property, or we've successfully used in the past, is the idea of a tree fund so that the town can use that money to put the trees in their parks or something, as opposed to me planting random trees in the middle of the woods that nobody's going to see. But we will come up with a response and make sure we're consistent with that.
I don't know where we are as far as the tree law was undergoing amendment, and I don't think it's been adopted yet. So just be aware that that's in process, yeah.
I believe it's
I
back
think
before
the public hearing is still open on
Okay.
that.
There might be some amendments. There might be some amendments and revisions still, so, but that's open. I highly doubt it.
Stay tuned, and we'll make sure to, respond appropriately, whether it be this new version
Right.
or the older version.
Right. Yeah, there's no projects beginning with a P or with a a V, as far as I know, as far as grandfathering. Ashley, did you have comments?
As far as seeker goes, you can assume lead agency status tonight. You had declared your intent, but at the last meeting, the 30 days hadn't passed, so assuming you haven't received any objections, then you're able to do that this evening.
So with that, I will make a motion that we assume lead agency for the proposed action, the Verizon Homeland Towers located at Strauss Lane. May I have a second?
Second.
Noreen?
Bonnie Franson,
Aye.
Pat Shea,
Aye.
Nick Napoli.
Aye.
And Jeff Manson.
Aye.
Motion carries, so we are the lead agency. Any other actions we need to take this evening?
They would like a site walk. You don't respond to my emails.
Oh, the site walk?
Oh, sorry, she's got another one.
So as far as the general municipal law referral, that this does need to go to Orange County Planning Department. I don't believe you've done that previously, so if you think there's sufficient information to do so,
You think it's ready to go over to Orange County? Get some comments on them? You okay with that? Yep? Okay, we'll send it over.
Sure. And bring it up tonight?
probably won't go out until
January 3rd. No, I will try my best to get it out tomorrow.
As far as the visual analysis, so we had talked about the as-of-right height increase that's allowed under the federal laws, the 10% or the additional antenna, and I thought that was going to be addressed in the visual analysis, but it didn't seem like it was. So if you can update that to show, as-of-right height would allow, and just to remind the board that the law does allow the applicant to increase a tower by either 10% or an additional antenna array up to 20 feet. So for purposes of seeker and your review of the visual impacts under the RPO regulations, it's important you see that potentially maximum height unless the applicant says, is willing to say they wouldn't do that without returning back to the board.
So we'll review that, but from one standpoint, the application that were put forth is for the 100-foot tower. So if the fact that there's a federal law that allows eligible facilities requests to co-locate up to 20 feet, it's speculative if they would be doing that. And they could come here and co-locate 10 feet. There could be never a co-location. So to have in the analysis a review of the tower at 20 feet higher when that fact may never occur, we're a little bit hesitant to provide that because it's now not the application we're providing. We're now looking at something that speculatively could happen.
What do the regulations state as far as if it were to increase by that 10%, is it?
10% or 20 feet.
20 feet?
It's the greater of 10% or the height of one additional antenna array with separation from the nearest existing antenna not to exceed 20 feet. So I don't know which, might be.
Next words is the phrase whichever is greater.
Yes, it is whichever is greater,
So
but I
that's been
don't,
interpreted to be essentially it's
20 feet being the,
no 20 feet
highest.
plus a rad center. So what that works as is that and the FCC in the 2020 rulings came out with further clarification on this, is that from the top of Verizon's antennas, it would be 20 feet plus the carrier. That would be the maximum height that someone could go up. However, that again, all of that is speculative. Someone would have to make an application to do that. We don't have any applications for that right now.
What I
the
think we,
alternative could be stipulating that won't occur without, in that event it does happen, someone seeks to do that in the future, to return to the appropriate local boards to assess the visual.
that was going to be my question. In terms of the federal regulations, does that normally just have to go to the building inspector?
As of right, so it
Right.
wouldn't return to
So
the
it wouldn't return to us unless you allowed for that to happen.
Not necessarily. So the way the federal law works is it says that you have to approve the application. It says the town has to approve it. It doesn't say that the building inspector has to approve it by building permit only. So if the town on its own determined that these types of co-location applications required a visit to the planning board to confirm it met their criteria, that's absolutely within the town's rights. The town is just restricted to what it's able to review in that application and the time frame for which it can review. It doesn't choose who the reviewer is. So many towns do say, because it's more of a ministerial act, once you check off the boxes, it's as of right, but many other towns also require me to go to the planning board for the same application.
Well, so we had a situation for a cell tower in Shongum, and they simply just installed it and relied on that and said they only had to go to the building inspector, even though the planning board indicated they should go in front of the planning board. So I'm not sure with regard to what the town can and can't do relative to the federal regulations. Maybe they were in the wrong, maybe
I
not.
definitively can tell you that the FCC has not dictated who the reviewer of an eligible facilities request application is. It is not within the applicant or the FCC to say that this person in the town has to be the reviewer. Now, there may be some other town code in that instance. I'm not aware of your particular situation, that the town code dictated in that scenario, it had to be reviewed by the building inspector only. But no, there is absolutely nothing that prohibits a town from requiring that particular application to be reviewed by the planning board, the zoning board, the town board, whatever board it wants. The part that it controls is that when you're reviewing that application, it's these 6 criteria, which is can't exceed more than that 20 feet plus a rad center, can't protrude from the side of the tower more than 20 feet, can't add more than 4 equipment cabinets, can't defeat an existing stealth design. So that would be one reason why it may come to this board. If there's a stealth design, even a colored tower, it would be up to this board to determine whether that co-location defeated that stealth design. Also, if there is any conditions of approval, it would be up for the town to confirm whether that new application defeated any conditions of approval from the original tower. So it's that criteria that gets reviewed within 60 days. Can be the planning board, can be the town board, can be the building inspector.
Yeah, I'd like that reviewed because I've had a very concrete example of where that was used against the town, that particular provision. And I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if there was something that said that, it's for lack of a better word, a ministerial review as opposed to discretionary review. But there's something that ended up where we went down a path that the planning board was unhappy with because they expected, since it was a co-location, and given previous approvals, that it would come back to the planning board. And that group that decided to co-locate said, we can do this, it's within our rights, the federal regulations allow us to, we do not have to go in front of you. So I would like to understand that before we close.
The regulations they allow the state or the government to require the applicant to provide documentation or information only to the extent reasonably related to determining whether the request meets the requirements of what would be a not substantial modification, which is the 10% or height increase. That would be one of those. So as far as the types of information that you can request, I mean, you could certainly request more, but they're not, obligated to give that under the law. So that's why I have seen it in other municipalities where there's been, if they didn't want to do that additional height analysis, that they then stipulated in the event, in the future, someone wants to increase the height, they'll return back to the board.
Can't stop the application. Am I getting that? Once the FCC approves it and deems it right, it's going up, but the boards could take apart what color they want it and stuff like that.
So the FCC wouldn't review the application beforehand. It's more of once you've submitted an application and asserted in your application that's this eligible facilities request and it meets these 6 objective criteria, then it's up to the town to make the determination if it actually is meeting that criteria or not. If the town makes a determination that, whoa, David, you're building this tower and you're extending another 40 feet, that's way beyond the threshold level, and it makes that determination. Now we're no longer an eligible facilities request, and we'd have to go through all the regular local approval processes.
Well, one of the realities of our zoning is that you're a use variance. And so I don't know what would occur, because if you get a use variance, it's for the use, can they just increase the height? And then just technically speaking, just from a technical perspective, you build the tower at this height, and for this particular tower, how many co-locations? 4? How many is there? Usually it used to be 6 carriers. I don't know if that's still the case.
4 main carriers right now,
Okay, so 4,
So
you're
it's-
planning for 4.
planning for full build-out.
So let's say someone did want to, if there was a 5th carrier,
Yep.
and they wanted to go up. How would you physically do that? How would you structurally do that?
Well, I mean, you can speak for the structural component.
Obviously, it would vary depending on the additional weight that's up there. You know, we did have a site recently where they put these strips of steel on the sides, and, you know, the engineers were able to calculate that increases structural integrity enough to add additional weight to it. So there are ways to do that. Generally speaking, from Homeland's perspective, even though it costs us a little bit more, we generally over-design our foundation underground a little bit to accommodate structural. But just generally speaking, there are ways to modify the tower to make it more strong.
Well, so let me ask it this way. How many towers in general over the past 5 years where Homeland has increased the height to have additional carriers located on the pole? How often does this happen? How common is it? Or is it basically you take one pole down and you put a brand-new pole up?
So it depends on the site. So I do a lot of these applications too. So there could be a drop and swap, which would not be an eligible facilities request. So if they have to take down the support structure and build a new support structure in its place, even if it's only that 10, 15 feet taller, that would not be an eligible facilities request because you'd be taking away the original support structure. It seems like it'd be the same application even if you built it in the right place, but trust me, the FCC has said that's not an eligible facilities request. The whole initial reason for our hesitation on providing the additional 20 feet is to avoid this conversation we're having right now. We're discussing not our application, but some speculation of what could happen in the future. And from a zoning standpoint, we can't have our applications be based on speculation on what could happen. We don't have any eligible facilities requests or any confirmations of co-location, but I think what I'm getting at, the main concern is that you don't want a future co-location application to just go directly to the building inspector and never come back to the planning board.
Well, or no, just from a practical perspective, how often does this happen? The two of you have been, doing this exclusively. How often does it occur that a cell tower height is increased?
On a scale
I just want to understand, the frequency. Do you see one a year? Do you see, if you do 100 towers a year, is it one a year? Are there 20 that are being retrofitted? I have no idea. That's why I'm asking the question.
Right, and any answer I gave you, I'm not sure how accurate it would be. I've done maybe a handful of towers a year that would be an extension, but it's not in the, if I do 100 towers a year, it's probably in 5 that are actually being extended. But I don't operate all of the towers in the area, so I'm not sure if that's a real world.
I'm just talking about the ones you've represented.
It's fewer and far between, because more often than not, the towers were designed with the idea of, hey, we want to have co-locators below us, because it is an additional cost to extend that tower. That's an investment in the infrastructure, so it would be better if you had a co-location rad center below. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes a carrier needs that additional 10, 15, 20 feet.
So is the experience more that they're older towers? That if it's a newer tower, in all likelihood, because people are going to be co-locating, there's space?
It could also be because the particular jurisdiction we went in front of wanted to lower the height of the tower so much. So we've gone into some municipalities where 100 and something foot tower was proposed, only a 90-foot tower was built. Because through the review process, it was determined that there would be a concession in height, a concession in coverage to meet that criteria. Then a few years later, it's got to be extended again to actually meet the coverage objectives. So there could be those reasons, could be the reasons of Dish Wireless is a new carrier. It wasn't anticipated at that time, and they're building a tower that have 3 rad centers above the tree lines. And so they need a 4th rad center, but they can't go below the tree line. Could also be that in 20 years from when the tower was first built to where it is now, trees went up another 10, 15 feet. And so now that rad center that was there is no longer there. There's various reasons. It's engineering, it's site specific. We know how to build a bridge, but where you build a bridge over the Hudson, the location matters. It's very dictated by the topography in the area, the amount of users in the area, the design of the site. So I couldn't say it's just older towers, it's just towers for this, it's
But it
various
happens,
reasons.
but it happens.
It does
So-
happen.
So then to Ashley's point, from a seeker perspective, you've had communities that have asked for the visuals for that extension. I know you're saying it's speculative, I understand. Has that been evaluated in other communities?
I know of one that they actually just stipulated that they would not, and I believe it was possibly Homeland Towers, stipulated that they would not seek that increase without returning to the planning board and/or zoning board. And I think here, too, you have the unique situation with in this ridge line preservation overlay district that has its own, very specific height regulations and analyses that are required, so to be sensitive to that.
It's a reasonable question for sure. The reason I was mostly silent there is generally I'm only involved in the new build side, so I haven't actually been involved with any extensions. The tower you may be thinking is potentially the application I have in New Paltz, right? So there we did make the concession to forego the eligible facilities request and require that applications go back to the planning board. In that instance, we were proposing a 150-foot tower. We wound up coming down to concede to a 140-foot and then promised not to extend it. Here, we came in so low, I don't know if we'll be able to make that same assertion, but I'd like to just go back, talk to my people, and talk to Verizon, and we can speak about this at the next meeting. But it is a reasonable question to ask. I, too, would be apprehensive about showing visuals, because then it is kind of misleading. At minimum, I would definitely be willing to have any approval resolution have the condition that it would not be allowed to go directly to the building inspector, even an EFR, that we would concede that would have to at least go back to the planning board.
Can it be a condition of the use variance? Can the use variance, is a general question, can a use variance limit the height? And then would that be binding on
So
you based on those federal regulations?
no, because the federal regulations say you can't have a condition of approval that says you can't increase the height of the tower by 20 feet. Because ultimately, it's not our right, it's that next co-locating carrier's right. So the issue, and we can discuss it, I think you really want it to come back before you and just not be approved by a building inspector. And we can discuss if we can have that as a condition of approval. I think ultimately what we're trying to say here is that if the tower, what we're showing now, is of a level of review and gets a level of response, we don't want to see the fact that we show you this speculative thing that may not happen, 20 feet higher being a reason why, well, I don't like the height of that tower there, so now we're not going to approve this application. That is really our concern here, is because by showing something that may never come to fruition, we're now giving you advice and giving you kind of a worse impact than we're actually providing. And it's from a standpoint that this is a federal law that allows that co-locator that additional height. So it's really not, from a standpoint, anything we can do to prevent that. There's a federal law that says they can get that additional height. They can co-locate on this tower as long as they don't create a substantial change. But whether or not that review of whether or not it is a substantial change or not, that can be done from the town's wishes by any board. And I think what I was trying to bring on earlier was it's not just the height. They also have to show that they're not going to defeat this stealth design. They also would have to show that they wouldn't violate any prior conditions of approval. So it's not necessarily something that they just come in and they get the additional 20 feet. They would have to show that they wouldn't, if it's a monopine design, that it would still look like a monopine. They wouldn't be able to just put up the additional 20 feet, and it would still have to look like the monopine that this board approved. So I think there's additional review factors that it's not just they get to go, build the tower and it's just 20 feet.
So I think we'll kind of table the discussion. You'll go back to your people, find out what they're willing to,
Sure.
accept, and we can explore this further. Ashley, were there any other comments?
We talked about the tree preservation plan already. So the applicant did submit a narrative addressing the RPO district regulations. I don't know if the board had a chance to look at that, but you should be going through, if not tonight, maybe at the next meeting, and addressing, any additional information you might need or any waivers that might be required from those sections.
Happy to go through the memo if you'd like tonight, or we can wait to the public hearing.
I think we'll wait.
Sure.
Thank you, that sounded boring.
You talk about already the stealthing techniques. You're still considering the different options there. Just a couple minor requests. I'd ask that on sheet SB1, the bulk table, also note that the property is within the RPO district and just refer to the RPO section of the village code, the town code. And also on SB1 and C1 to show the boundary of the RPO district. The limits of disturbance, if you could also designate those on the site plan sheet C1.
Board members, any other comments? No? No?
Comment.
Okay.
I did have just a couple of requests. One, we did do this paper already, but there's a shot clock as part of the review of this application. We had previously extended it to December 20th tonight. We did through paper, just extended again, I believe was it January?
To February. So the board, I had them approve that at the December 8th meeting so that we were
Okay,
able
that's
to
right.
sign it
Understood.
beforehand. So it's through February 21st.
Correct. Okay, I just didn't know if that was tonight. And then, was there a date that would work for the site visit? Is that something we wanted to discuss tonight?
What's the problem?
Board doesn't live here anymore. The NCC does not have an arbor.
Oh,
Dennis is here.
Dennis, you want to come on up and speak to this?
I'll need you on the mic, so just.
As you alluded earlier, the tree code is in the process of revision. Max, the stack, has done that. We were given the opportunity to do that. Propose that arborist, which you have that proposal, at least I discussed it last Friday with Tony Cardone, to that for approval. I also asked on that occasion is if that approval is going to take some time. When we do have some done, we obviously need first to retain basis. Might visit tree impacts. Sorry.
Okay. So I think we have to follow up with the town board in terms of what they're doing with regard to an arborist, or if we can return, because we as a planning board could retain a specialist if we wanted, and we could bring an arborist on board, because it may take some time before there's someone who's actually, I don't know if they're talking about someone who's going to be appointed or what the intent is, so.
The arborist that was that has submitted a proposal, part of that was a lump sum portion to review the tree code, meet with whoever, discuss any revisions that we feel may be necessary.
Right, and I think this would be, normally it's an hourly, and it's escrowed, so the applicant or the arborist is, the cost of the arborist is billed back to the applicant. So it'd be a different, we would retain them in a different manner than I think what your purposes are. If you could send over, I don't know if we have whoever submitted a proposal to you, so we could look that over, because I think the simplest thing would be if we're going to have a tree expert go out, just for us to retain them as a professional.
That's fine with us. I think what we would also suggest is that if it takes some time to hire this tree expert or the arborist, maybe we could have a site visit with just the planning board and the staff. Just the idea of walking the site, seeing where the location is, and then we can have another site visit later with the particular focus with the arborist.
Right, so,
Also, I think I just pulled up the law, so it does, I think, speak to the draft law that's before the town board, allowing the Monroe Conservation Commission to hire a professional landscape architect or arborist. So I don't know whether you've had Karen, the board's landscape architect, review this project at all,
I don't think
refer to
she's-
her, but it might perhaps make sense to have her on any site visit if she's going to be.
Right, why don't we have you reach out to Karen and ask her if because she's a landscape architect. I know she was out on Monroe Commons and she was looking at trees in general, but I don't know that that's necessarily her specialty. I'm not sure. So perhaps we can reach out to her and see if she could take a look at this. And in particular, we just want to understand the trees that would be taken down. And then if there's replacement, maybe it's in kind. She was also up at Allison Drive, I know, talking about the trees as well. So maybe we could reach out to her.
Sean or I can do.
Thank you.
The arborist that we have identified is available and on an hourly basis
Okay.
now. The proposal, Jennifer would have that. Tony Cardone has it.
Yeah, we'll
obviously
get it
I
from
can forward
them
it
then.
to you, but
Noreen, perhaps you could ask
right.
Jen for it.
and we would happily meet with you to discuss it,
Okay.
to meet with Max if needs be. And that was all we developed a scope of work,
Right.
scope of services for the arborist, which he has responded to, and it's all there set out in his proposal.
So why don't we try and set a date for site visit? The MCC is welcome to attend, and hopefully we'll have the arborist on board. If not, we can go out there again, or they can go out there, and whoever wants to join them can do so. So, but we should probably just get out there. It's getting cold. It's
That's what I
already
thought.
I have
cold,
a
so.
question for this. I'm more concerned about the snow coming.
Yeah, I
and
know.
Having everybody go out there.
So I think normally we schedule these things for around 4 or 5 o'clock. I don't know if that's too early for some. And the other,
Dark out at that
well, I was going to
hour.
say, the other issue is it's too dark. So we really have to do it earlier or in the morning.
We're available for
or-
whatever works best for you, and then. If
Can you
there-
do weekends?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I think a weekend, that makes more sense, probably. We're just coming into the holiday, so I think something in January.
We're absolutely available. And then, Noreen, I would just ask if we could also get whatever date the planning board chooses and offer it up to the zoning board to see if they would also like to come on that date as well.
How about, just to throw something out there for now, January 7th? Is that too soon? January 7th? People around? It's going to depend on weather. January 7th? Okay. January 7th?
Have to
you
check
not
as-
be around? You going to Florida?
Eh,
Bahamas?
That's a good idea.
Take us
Key
with
West?
Today's the shortest day of the year, so it should be a little bit lighter.
There you
Yeah.
go. Very good. Let's shoot for January 7th. We'll just send an email around to everybody, and then let's see who says yes, and let us know if you can set that up, and then maybe around 10 or so. I don't even know if we want to do noon, just so it gets warmer. 10, just bundle up, so it doesn't take up your day. Okay.
The final thing is, at this point in the application, I think it'd be a real benefit to hear from the public. We would really like to schedule a public hearing for January. We know that we still have to respond to the comments we received tonight, but I think most of those were fine-tuning comments. It may be helpful, since we're fine-tuning, if we get the input from the public while we're doing that, see if they have any comments on any of the particular views from the visual analysis, or if they have any particular comments about their lack of service in the area or the need for this facility.
So I guess that's a request for a public hearing.
Correct.
So right now, the ZBA is still, do they have an open public hearing, or where are we with the ZBA? Have they received the request for a use variance?
Correct, and when we were before the ZBA, they asked for the planning board to take action and take lead agency on SECRA, so they've kind of paused the review on their application until SECRA's acted on.
So they haven't initiated a public hearing?
No, I don't believe so.
In the past, cell tower applications, they don't require public hearings before the planning board because it's not a special use as allowed. So the zoning board has held the public hearings, you haven't, but you could certainly, discretionary, you can choose to still hold one.
So do we want to open something in January? Is it premature or is it reasonable? Because we can leave it open, I guess. Thoughts? You ready to hear from the public in January?
I think so.
Yeah?
I'll roll with the flow.
You okay? Nick?
No, I'm never ready.
You're never ready?
Not for them, no. No, of course, yeah, we're good.
All right, so why don't we plan then at our January, it would be our second January meeting, right? That we would open the public hearing?
Yeah, that would be January 17th. Happened to my mind.
And I'd really love to get our RF engineer here.
We have to have, there's another, public hearing that night.
That's probably not going to be that long. I think it's okay. That's not, there's no one up there. That would be of, I think that would be concerned
Oh, we
at
verified
this
that it was
point.
it was a good date.
Although you never know.
Public hearing, January 17th.
All right, so I will make a motion that we schedule a public hearing on January 17th, 2023, for the Homeland Towers Verizon telecommunications tower at 2426 Strauss Lane to begin at 6 p.m. or as soon thereafter. May I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Noreen?
Napoli,
Aye.
Bonnie Franson,
Aye.
Pat Check.
Aye.
All right, with the motion carries, so we'll start a public hearing and see who comes out.
Much.
You're welcome.
Have a Merry Christmas and Happy
Thank you,
Holidays to
you
the
too.
board. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Peace.
Very good.
Thank you. Did I get that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
All right, next on the agenda is Pilati Village. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight?
Tired, but
Yeah.
just been tired. Be good to get to the holidays.
I can sympathize, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I have your drive. Just hold on a second here. That. All right. So when last we met, we had our public information session.
That's correct.
And so I think at this point, we're following up to determine whether there's anything additional we need to get to our EAF Part 3. So Sean had submitted us almost like a table, right? Let me bring that up. So, do you have any background as far as,
So I believe he went through and commented on rest items or not. There are some items that are still outstanding.
I think the idea too is that the applicant can take this as kind of an outline for preparing a expanded
Part
Part 3 narrative that refers to the studies, for example, that one up there that says addressed by the SWIP, so to say, that's
that's covered?
not going to be a significant
Right.
adverse impact because of the SWIP. So that kind of analysis.
So it looks like there's either NA, I was just trying to understand the no comment. So if it says proposed action may involve the excavation, removal of more than 1,000 tons of natural material, NA, so that's not even applicable. Whereas A, proposed action may involve construction on land where depth to water table is less than 3 feet, the comment, no, it's not addressed yet. Because in general, there are wetlands there. I mean, we know the water table is less than 3 feet in places. I think except for maybe the outfalls, I don't know what's occurring in areas where the depth of water table is less than 3 feet. Are we encroaching into wetlands?
Oh, it's construction on land.
Yeah.
So I don't believe we're going to have any construction on, so we provided a geotechnical report. And if you take a look at that, it'll tell you what the soil profiles are in all the areas where we're proposing construction. And in those areas, it doesn't appear to be any water that's within a 3-foot depth below the surface.
So B, construction on slopes of 15% or greater, this is addressed by the SWIP. Construction on land where bedrock is exposed or generally within 5 feet of existing ground surface, you're addressing this by filling. So there is no rock removal?
No, not really. So remember, we're using the existing building pads that are there, so we're minimizing as much of the construction as possible that would be on any of that land where there is rock. I think they kind of figured it out when they did the first part of the development.
Okay, proposed action, the D was NA, more than 1 year, multiple phases. That is provided by the SWIP, but, well, yeah, because we're under land disturbances. Result in increased erosion, addressed by SWIP. Coastal erosion hazard area not applicable. Other impacts not identified to date. Impact on geological features. Landforms, there's nothing there that's significant as far as unique geological landforms. Water body, surface area of a water body, dredging, those are all not relevant. Proposed action may involve construction within or joining a freshwater tidal wetland. Okay, so with the exception of habitat, he's indicating it's been addressed.
I have to double check. I wasn't aware, actually, of the town consultant's concern about any habitat. I know we had submitted this to the New York State DEC. They had asked me to put together that timber rattlesnake informational pamphlet, also put it on the construction plans. We are not going to be cutting during any time periods that are required as a result of Indiana or northern long-eared bat. So I believe that's the one thing I can tell you we got feedback from on the DEC, and they had no additional comments for that.
So DEC, with regard to those particular permitting applications, they didn't have any comments on habitat?
Not on habitat. We were
Okay.
still waiting for comments back on the Speedies permits for the wastewater treatment plants, but everything else we've gotten comment back on.
I think, and just to make sure that the DEC comments on it, because I know the timber rattlesnake study had to be submitted to them, so if they've reviewed that and determined that a take permit's not required, or whatever kind of comments they had, to make sure that's part of your submission.
I believe that Noreen was copied on all those emails from the DEC, but I can certainly resend it also if required. In terms of the habitat and them not needing any more information as it relates to that.
So I think the only thing from a habitat perspective that, and these are comments that we've been receiving, with regard to the lake, and to what extent the discharge is affecting the lake, which would include habitat, and then to what extent is the increase in flow, which it may be there was flow, then there might have been a decrease in flow, and we may be increasing the flow again, because I know this may have been serving more at one time, correct? The St. Pat's Villa?
That's correct.
Right.
The Speedies permits, I think, were pretty much utilized to the fullest extent when we had St. Pat's, the military academy on the one side, and the other convents and buildings on the north side of the road.
And so now we're actually just adding flow back to an existing, where there had already been an existing Speedies permit for a particular level of flow and treatment of flow. But I do want to, and I'm going to speak to Mike, I forget his last name, from DEC.
I'm dealing with Ryan O'Mara there, and he's on the wastewater side.
On the Speedies permit side?
Speedies permit.
Okay.
Mike Grosso, I think might be his name, who's handling this.
Yes, right. Now you're dealing with Brian, did you say Brian, on the wetland side of it?
No, so the permit coordinator is Mike Grosso. Ryan O'Mara is
Oh.
from the wastewater division of the DEC. He's handling the Speedies permits as it relates to the plant review.
Okay.
And Habitat would be Lisa Massey.
Oh, okay. I know Lisa Massey. All right. Because I already have an email into Mike. He said give him a call. So I was going to do that tomorrow, just to see where things stand.
Yeah, I would appreciate that because I emailed actually last week and I copied Tony Cardone on it too because I know sometimes if he responds,
Yeah.
it'll push it along a little bit. And
He actually responded to me right away.
okay, he did respond to us too, but he said we're still working on it.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I want to understand where they are in the process, and then specifically speak to them to concerns about the lake, and then sort of how is that addressed within the overall Speedies, permit and the waste train.
I can tell you this, the only comment I did get back was that they were reviewing the effluent limits for both plants. So they are looking at those effluent limits to see if there's any modification that might be made. We just haven't heard back yet.
Just for the board's benefit, so we've been getting some emails from homeowners and property owners that are around the lake. And I think what might have gotten lost in the process, and it might have been because when you had one of the public participation events, the focus was on, I think, the St. Pat's Villa wastewater treatment plant, which does enter the lake.
Correct.
So it appears that the public wasn't aware that, for whatever reason, that there are two wastewater treatment plants, and that the senior housing proposal will utilize the Queen of Apostles wastewater treatment plant, and that discharge goes to the wetland.
Correct.
Right. So I think I've shared that information with them, and just so that they understood that the entirety of the project is actually not going into St.
Blythe-Lea.
Right,
Right,
or
right.
St. Pat's
Right.
Villa wastewater treatment to then be discharged to Blythea.
Yeah, Queen of Apostles discharges to a New York State DEC wetland that, if you look at the topography, it actually drains away
It does.
from Blythe-Lea Lake. So
Yeah.
really, you're only dealing with St. Pat's that is a direct discharger, so to speak, to Blythe-Lea.
Yeah, we actually created a map we'll give to the town board at some point, and we'll give it to the planning board, but you see that there's a divide. So
Correct. There's a high knoll right in the middle of
Right there.
of the wetland, which forces flow to go towards Mansion Ridge Golf Course.
Right. So we have a particular program called Global Mapper, and it'll show like where the discharge, where the flow goes. And at least based on the topographic information, that flow is going south,
Correct.
and not toward the lake.
Correct.
So, yeah, I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on that. But I am going to speak to Mike in general, to see where things
Thank you.
are.
Appreciate that.
Proposed action may create turbidity in a water body, either from upland erosion runoff or by disturbing bottom sediments. That's the SWIP. Construction, one or more intakes, not applicable. Construction, one or more outfalls for discharge of wastewater to surface waters. Isn't that what's happening with our Speedies?
Are you on letter F right now?
I'm in G.
G.
Their outfalls are there, but there are outfalls to surface waters, right?
Can you scroll back up to the title of what this particular section is reviewing again?
Sure. I thought it was water resources. Yeah, surface water.
Impacts on surface water. So we do have the two outfalls for the stormwater ponds.
Right.
If we want to include that. They are dealt with obviously through the SWIP, but that would probably be appropriate to note that. The wastewater treatment plant outfalls are obviously existing.
Noted, though.
Could do that.
I think we should note it and then what the changes are. So stormwater ponds and outfalls. And though existing address what changes there may be. And that could speak to the effluent, maybe different limits, et cetera, wherever we end up with that. Proposed action may cause soil erosion. Has addressed comments raised by town's wetland consultant with the exception of habitat. So I think that's just about water habitat.
Okay.
So like wetlands habitat.
Right.
So in other words, if we're reactivating the outfall for Queen of Apostles, what effect does that have, if anything, on the wetland to which it discharges? Water quality, I think that's SWIP, but it also has to do with the Speedies permit that gets issued for the wastewater treatment plants. Because the water quality is going to depend on ultimately what those effluent limits are, right?
Yeah, I would agree adding that.
Proposed action may involve application of pesticides or herbicides, none proposed, other than
Not that I'm aware of.
routine maintenance
Yeah,
lawns.
Exactly. And as I'd noted during the public informational meeting, a lot of that's going to find its way into those stormwater ponds that are on site.
Action may require construction of new or expansion of existing wastewater treatment facilities. Oops. Not new and not expansion, but I would say minor because are there improvements that need to be made? There have been improvements that need to be
I would say that until we hear back from the DEC, I don't know that we can really answer that question, so it might be more of a to be determined. I mean, everything right now is indicating that we don't, but we have to see what they say about the effluent limits.
Okay. Impact on groundwater. This is pending review for the water supply. Withdrawal, pending review. All that is addressed. May involve commercial application within 100 feet of a potable drinking water irrigation source. Is that possible with maintenance?
I would imagine it might be, potentially. I don't know about the irrigation source because we're not proposing any, but a potable drinking water source could be the wells that are on site.
Right. Okay, impact on flooding.
Although I would note that on the northern site, the wells are actually drilled in those areas of rock outcropping, and they're at a higher elevation. So,
Oh, okay.
so pesticides would probably really never really make it to that area, and we have a parking lot kind of surrounding them. So it's not an area where we would have any kind of heavy maintenance there. We have to see if we're going to even use the wells on the south site at this point, because we probably have enough adequate water supply on the north site to supply the whole project.
Okay. Impact on flooding. So it looks like there is some limited area with 100-year floodplain.
Yes, it's not even really close to us, but it's in the vicinity. And it doesn't actually get into the area of the plant, but it's close by.
There isn't a dam on the site, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Because technically, the lake is actually on their property, on the property that's to the north.
Correct,
where the
Blakely, yeah,
senior,
right.
yeah.
There is a dam on that.
Right, but is it on their property actually, or no?
Do you have the map?
I do, or I did.
I'm not sure if I show it, but I got an idea of where.
Oh, you want your, I'm
Yeah, the site plan, if we could look at the existing conditions.
gonna guess that, I'm gonna guess it's not there because I don't know that you go that far over,
I don't believe we do.
but let's see.
Go to the second sheet, the conservation plan, and then if we zoom in, yeah, I don't have it shown in that area, but I do know exactly where that dam is, and it's all the way on the eastern side, yeah, all the way over there. So it's not technically, the sisters own the property, but it's so far away from what we're proposing here, and there's no modifications need to be made to it for, as a result of this project. And the dam is just before Shadowmere, if I'm not mistaken.
On a totally different parcel.
Take a look at the tax maps on the front sheet also. It looks like it is completely on a different parcel, yeah.
So this is the parcel. No, actually, yes.
That's our parcel, correct, that we're working on.
That's the one you're working on. So I don't think this is,
Not highlighting that area.
yeah. So I think it's a different parcel. Okay. Impacts on air. Plants and animals. Waiting for a DEC response.
I think in that section too, Mike mentioned the tree clearing restriction for the bats, so I don't think it's in this outline, but that would be something to also put in there. With bats?
I don't recall.
Like whatever popped up on the mapper for northern long-eared
Long-eared.
and possibly Adiana.
Okay.
Do you have quick access to the mapper? Because you can go to the last
I'm
page and
gonna-
it'll tell you. Or not the mapper, but even my EAF, I should say. I think you have my EAF if you want in the project folder as well.
I have it here. Northern long-eared bat and the timber rattlesnake.
Do you have any significant, I don't think we do, significant natural communities in the EAF?
I'll defer to Ashley. She has it in front of her.
natural community, Chestnut, Northern.
Aesthetics. Aren't we on a scenic road?
Harriman Heights.
Right. This essentially just means we have to cover it in the EAF Part 3.
Okay.
We have the no effect letter from SHPO, but that's related to cultural.
Correct.
Now here, this is relevant. They had their finding of no effect. So that's taken care of. You have the calculation on the map?
That's correct.
Okay. Out of CEA. We've addressed traffic. Lasting. No odors. Else. No remediation issues, right?
That I'm aware of, nothing that showed up on the EAF.
So for consistency with land use plan, I think that all depends on whether the town adopts the rezoning, correct? Because the CCR, the concept of it came after the plan was adopted. So the plan shows that area as, I think, maybe 3 and 1 acre zoning. So it says consistency and sharp contrast to surrounding land use patterns. I mean, it is a different use. So I think we have to say yes to be addressed.
But you do have a school nearby. You have Sapphire, you have Little Pals, you have the existing convent, which has got, people who go there for services, so I don't know that it's drastically different.
Yeah, I think it just has to be explained that it's multifamily housing that isn't there now. To other,
Ridge,
yeah, to the Mansion Ridge multifamily.
discussion of generally the area. Item C2 is where you would discuss the R, that it does require a zoning amendment, but, where it falls into the CCR requirement.
Because it says no commended. It's no impact really, right?
Referring to the inconsistency, but yeah.
Right. This is that double negative. I wouldn't say that it's not applicable. It is changing the density, but you're also providing the infrastructure.
Proper infrastructure. Also depends on how you look at it. The existing infrastructure, we have existing wastewater treatment plants, we have existing wells, so. Explain that.
Item G2 to talk about, the limits of the wastewater treatment capacity and the intent of the wells to only, it's going to be a public water supply, but will just be used for the on-site community.
Gotten any responses from any other agencies, fire, school, anybody? Comments? Did we send anything out
And that I'm aware of.
for our lead agency only, maybe?
I can tell you the school district did attend the public participation meeting, but when they found out it was for sewage treatment plants, they weren't really interested. They did have a question regarding, obviously, population of of children that would be associated with this particular project. We discussed it, and then they didn't seem to have any other concerns after that.
I did send back in January of this year to the state police, the school district, the ambulance, and the joint fire district, and I haven't gotten anything.
I'll send this around. Want to make us as items as part of an EAF.
Can you email it to me as well?
I'll send that around. Is there anything else we need to discuss this evening? Because I think we just want to get into the EAF Part 3, get that buttoned down. We do have the follow-up for the water supply from the hydrogeologist, but I think for the most part, we're just following up with agencies now.
So our well testing proved to have plenty of capacity. Our water quality tests, actually, everything oddly enough came back well under the thresholds for any treatment, except for some reason PFAS and PFOA. We also did have a positive result for E. coli. So we think that the samples were contaminated. We're going to resample for the PFAS and PFOA, and we're also going to resample for the other two. So those are the three that we're going to retest for. But in terms of all the other constituents we tested for, they were well below thresholds. Just want to bring that to the board's attention.
Is that already occurring, or you're going to be doing it?
We're going to be doing it. We'll notify the town so that
Okay.
you want the hydrogeologist there to be there to witness what's going on. It's fine. When we did sample, it was raining, so they think that some of those samples might have been somehow contaminated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Board members, do you have any comments at this point in terms of?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I would note if for some reason we do have any of the PFAS or PFOA, it's treatable with granular activated carbon. So it's easily removed from a water supply. So I'm not necessarily concerned about its presence as opposed to whether or not I just actually need to show treatment for it or not. And the E. coli results, like 1 or 2 of the samples came back positive, the other ones came back negative. So that's why we believe there's some contamination.
Nothing.
Okay. So what are next steps? I guess we're going to just continue to work on SECR at this point and be just waiting to hear back from some agencies as well, and I will follow up with the agencies. And you'll be working on the Part 3.
Help contacting the DEC just to get us some feedback. That would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I will do that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your time tonight. Merry Christmas, Happy
Merry
New Year,
Christmas.
Happy Holidays, okay?
Thank you. Happy New Year. All right. So with that, it's 8:30. Do we want to do minutes, or do we want to just go into the new year with minutes?
Second that notion. Motion.
Okay. We'll hold off. Tired. May I make, oh, the meeting schedule.
Need to approve these first,
Yes.
so we can have meetings next year.
Where did I put that? I put that under.
Reviews.
Well, I'll make a motion, because it's not changing, to approve the 2023 meeting schedule. May I have a second?
Second.
Noreen?
Napoli,
Aye.
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
and Pache, sorry.
Aye.
Okay. Else?
Okay, so yes, the town board has sent, and I know I have forwarded it out before, she sent it to me again. They'd gotten a response from the planning board, county planning, regarding two-family overlay, and they had sent it to you for review and response, and they have nothing.
Do we have a time frame within which to answer? It's because it wasn't on our agenda.
No, she sent it to me on Monday to remind, yesterday to remind me to bring it up tonight. They're looking to have it on their January 9th meeting, according to yesterday's.
So I mean, we don't really have comments at this point in time, so I think if planning board members want to respond individually,
If you want to look at what they proposed,
yeah,
have the attachments and everything, and then get me something.
yeah. If they don't act, we can do it at our next meeting, but at this point, really don't have anything to share. Anything else?
Mr. Dennis would like to know when we can do a site walk with Monroe Commons. I know we will be back and forth.
So I think if you want to organize something with the applicant, that's fine. Wasn't sure what you're looking.
Scope, the scoping document
You can-
requires
you
that the,
Sit right there.
Yeah.
Easier for you.
Yes,
the scoping document requires a site visit by the MCC and to take into account any of their
Comments.
recommendations. So
Right.
that's why,
that's right. John Dahlgren was hoping we could get out there. So I think really it's something for your board to schedule directly with the applicant. I don't know that we have to be the intermediary.
Because the developer, what is the gentleman's name? Leaper? He approached me at the last board meeting. So are you saying it should be our initiative to actually arrange that site visit?
I think between your board, your group, and the developer, we don't have to necessarily participate, but let us know when you do go out, just in case there are some of the newer board members that might want to join you. But we did a site visit already, and so if you need to do one, at your convenience, your group's convenience, work with LEAP on what works best for you from a time frame perspective.
Okay, this only came about because of the request from the developer, from
Yeah.
Leaper. Otherwise, I have no particular wish to do it.
Yeah, I think it's because
If it's not necessary, from your point of view, from the planning board's point of view, isn't it a requirement?
yeah, so it's something that, so they're undergoing their their environmental review, and that involves them preparing their environmental impact statement, which is pursuant to a scope that was adopted by the planning board, I think last fall, if not. One of the requirements, I'm just trying to pull it up now so you know exactly what the purpose is. It's the applicant shall arrange for a site visit by the Monroe Conservation Commission and describe any comments or recommendations of the Monroe Conservation Commission, including but not limited to comments or recommendations as to the presence of any trees that would qualify as a landmark, native, protected, or specimen tree. So this board decided back then that in order to study the environmental impacts, the applicant has to arrange for your commission to go on site and look for those things. So I think probably the best way to do it would be to internally with your board, figure out dates that would work and then see if that could be arranged.
Well, there's two aspects. We will require an arborist or a tree expert. As things stand at the moment, we have a person who's prepared to do that on an hourly basis, unless that is not going to be approved. All of the documents relating to the arborist were submitted to Tony, and I believe copied to Noreen, including the proposal and all the resume and qualifications for the arborist. We will.
And I
That
did
this
speak
board
with
would
John.
say in that? Yeah, I don't think this board would have a say in if you wanted to hire someone as an outside consultant. I think that's.
Yeah, that seems strange to me that you wouldn't, as this is a planning function. But okay.
One of the responses were Tony to Dennis was that when the arborist goes out for a
Right.
hired through the planning board, or if they hire one.
I think we just need to make sure that they have the ability to do that,
Who's they?
meaning the MCC, whether you have the authority at this point in time to retain your own consultant. I'm not sure if it's in the tree law already. It may be.
It's inferred, but surely that needs to be authorized by you or the town board on every occasion that we would want to do that.
So we would retain a tree arborist for our own planning functions. I don't know that we can retain an arborist for your purposes. You should have the ability to do that as a group on your own if you are tasked with doing tree plants.
Right,
So-
and that's what the town board is getting.
I think that's,
They're approving it.
yeah, right. I think that's in the works.
So I spoke with John Dahlgren again yesterday, and he understands that you're waiting to get an arborist, and it has to be approved by the town board. Not expecting any time.
This is to the Monroe Commons? Okay, so...
Once Tony does the approval, then you can get your date set, and you can go with your arborist, and you can set it up with John Dahlgren, who is representing Monroe Commons.
You'll give me his contact information
Yes.
in due course.
Yep, I'll send it to your email that I have.
In the meantime, I guess I should approach Tony Cardone and see where it
I
stands.
think they're doing it at their next meeting, which is January.
January the
Yeah.
3rd, I think, 3rd? 5th, I don't know.
So,
That
the
might be
first
New
week,
York.
somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't seen their schedule for
All right,
next week.
so I'll do an email to Tony and I'll copy you guys and we go from there.
Yes,
Okay,
that'll work. Thank you.
okay, good, thank you.
Thanks. Anything else?
Good
Okay.
night and happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Holidays.
Merry Christmas. Motion to adjourn. May I have
So moved.
second?
Again.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, any abstentions? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy
Holidays,
New
Merry
Year. Thank you, yes. Yes.